In this tutorial, I'm going to explain how to interpret a climate graph. First, I want to explain how a climate graph is laid out. You'll see that there are two vertical axes and one horizontal axis. On the right vertical axis, information about rainfall and precipitation is provided. On the left vertical axis, information about temperature and degrees Fahrenheit is provided. And along the bottom, you'll see the months of the year. So, let me assess you on your ability to use this information. First, what month gets the most rainfall at this location? To figure that out, we're going to have to look at the key. Notice that the temperature in a climate graph is shown with a line, whereas the rainfall or precipitation is shown with bars. So back to my question. The month with the most precipitation then is November, with almost 15 inches of rainfall. The month with the least amount of precipitation then is June, with just above 6 inches. Now you should reference your climate zone sheet and identify the climate pictured using the word bank at the bottom. Let's start by focusing on temperature. You can see that throughout the year, this location stays above 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's nice and warm, which disqualifies humid continental and tundra. Next, we look at the second ingredient of climate, which is precipitation, and you'll see that it is pretty wet throughout the year. This is a location that gets a lot of rainfall. And so with those two pieces of information combined, there's really only one choice. This is a pretty typical example of a tropical wet climate. Okay, on this climate graph, we're again going to use the word bank at the bottom to determine what type of climate zone is shown. So let's start with precipitation. You can see that throughout the year, the precipitation is very low. So that disqualifies tropical wet and dry, and humid continental, leaving us with arid or tundra. So now we've got to look at temperature. And you can see pretty quickly that this is a location that does not get very warm at all. In fact, its warmest month is July, when it hits about 40 degrees on average. Otherwise, throughout the rest of the year, if you look to the right and left, this is a location that stays at a below zero temperature. So that, of course, disqualifies arid, leaving us with tundra. Here's another one. We'll start with temperature this time. You can see this is a place that is warm throughout the year, between the 50s and the 80s. And so we could have tropical wet and dry, or arid. Tundra and humid continental are disqualified. Now we're going to look at precipitation. If you look along the bottom, you can see this is a location that gets very little precipitation. And so when you combine those two factors, this is a clear example of an arid climate. In this climate graph, we'll start with precipitation. You can see that there's some variation throughout the year. I certainly wouldn't call this tropical wet or tropical wet and dry. There's just not enough rainfall. We can also disqualify arid because that's way too much rainfall for an arid climate, leaving us with tundra or humid continental. So the tiebreaker is going to be temperature. And right away you can see that this is a location that has temperature extremes. It's a seasonal location. You can see that in January we're at about 15 degrees. And then as we get into the summer months, it gets pretty warm, around an average of 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is a pretty typical humid continental climate. On this last slide, I want to demonstrate that I don't have to give you the locations for you to be able to figure out what hemisphere, at least, these places are. For example, if you look up here, this is a climate graph for Shwabnon, Wisconsin. But you look at the temperature line, and you can see that its warmest months are June, July, and August, which of course happens to be the time that the most direct rays are pointing towards the northern hemisphere. Down here, you see just the opposite. During those same months, June, July, and August, those are the coolest months of the year in this location, which happens to be Buenos Aires in Argentina. So while the most direct rays are hitting the northern hemisphere, the least direct rays are hitting the southern hemisphere. A pretty big giveaway is a hill-shaped curve for a northern hemisphere climate and more of a valley or a trough for a southern hemisphere climate.